Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today starts the draft coverage. The first round of the NBA draft is just 1 week from today. Today we'll talk about the picks the Wolves have, what they should be looking to do with those picks, what's the value of the picks they have in this year's draft, and also what are the mock drafts saying about players the Wolves may be interested in. We'll break it all down on the show today. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy Hump Day. And happy just 1 week away from the first round of the NBA draft. And yes, the Timberwolves have a first-round pick this year. Not only that, they have a high second-round pick as well. The second round will be a week from Thursday. So today is the first day where we're strictly doing draft coverage here on the show. I'll kind of lay out the next several days here in a moment. But today, I want to kind of take stock of the overall Wolves draft situation. What are the mocks saying? What could the Wolves be looking for? What are kind of the options that are likely to be available in the late first, early second round? We'll do all that on the show here today. A big thank you, though, first, off the top, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T Wolves and also at B Beecken with two B's, two E's, CKEN. All right. So everybody knows this year's draft is being talked about as one of the worst drafts in recent memory and worse than what the next couple are projected to be. There isn't even a whole lot of depth. It's not top heavy. There's a couple of guys that are kind of consensus top of the draft guys, but that's only because there isn't anything else. And it's just it's not an exciting draft. And it's not one that I'm disappointed that the Wolves are like not drafting in the lottery. But also after not having a first round pick last year, not having one next year, and of course, not having a lot of first round picks here moving forward, it's nice to at least be talking about a first-round pick for the Wolves. They drafted number 27 in this year's draft. They also have the 37th pick, which was, I believe that was the one that was initially Utah's that they got in the D'Lo trade, if I'm not mistaken, the D'Lo Mike Conley trade. At any rate, they have 27 and 37. And the overall value of those picks in this draft, so the website tankathon.com does a draft value rankings. They have a formula on there that basically what picks does each team have? Where do they rank? So, like, for instance, the number one value for draft picks in this draft is the Spurs. They have the 4, the 8, the 35, and the 48. And the Hawks have just the first overall pick and nothing else. They're ranked 4th in terms of draft value. The Wolves are 20th on that list with the 27 and 37 pick. They are a slot ahead of 3 teams that only have 1 pick in the 20s, the Cavs, Pelicans, and Suns. The Wolves having 27 plus 37 puts them ahead of those teams in terms of value. The only team that doesn't have a pick in this draft is the Brooklyn Nets. There are 3 teams that also don't have a first-round pick that only have a second. That's the Clippers, Warriors, and Mavs. All only have second-round picks. So, what do we think the Timberwolves are going to be looking for? Well, we started the offseason, I think it was right away, the day after or I guess 2 days after the Wolves were eliminated by the Mavericks, talking about the Wolves' needs this offseason. And I think it's pretty much 2 things, although one can be kind of spliced into 2 different categories. One thing they need is some more shooting. And that's kind of, nobody has enough shooting. The Wolves, yes, they finished. This is easy to forget because of the way the season finished for Minnesota, but the Wolves were 3rd in the entire league in 3-point percentage as a team. So they shot the ball well, but the frequency wasn't great enough early in the season, and they didn't shoot it all that well in the playoffs. And of their top 8 rotation guys, and that's what it boiled down to in the playoffs, is they were only playing 8 guys. 2 of them couldn't shoot threes, Rudy Gobert and Kyle Anderson. And Yet the rest of the team was so good as 3-point shooters that they still managed to finish in the regular season, at least third in the league in 3-point percentage as a team. Consistency is going to matter. Like Mike Conley had a career 3-point shooting season. Is that going to be the same again? Probably not. I think Jaden McDaniels could improve a little. Ant has been pretty stagnant in terms of his overall 3-point percentage. We talked about that on yesterday's show, on Tuesday's show. But I think there could be improvement there. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was pretty up and down. And then the backup point guard spot, whether it's Monte Morris or Jordan McLaughlin or somebody else, all probably are going to be around league average, maybe slightly better from outside the arc. But the Wolves could use more if it is the Kyle Anderson role, which we'll talk more about later in the show today. He is a free agent, and it's going to be hard to bring him back, although the Wolves will certainly try. Can they fill his role with somebody that's a better shooter than Kyle Anderson? That's going to be the easiest way to do this, because obviously they're not replacing Rudy Gobert, and Rudy's not all of a sudden going to be able to make threes. So the only spot you have, and if you expand the rotation beyond those 8 guys to 9 or 10 spots, then you get into, is it Monte Morris or Jordan McLaughlin? You get into the role that was Shake Milton or was Troy Brown Jr. early in the season. Is one of those going to be Leonard Miller? Is one of them going to be Jalen Clark by the end of the year next year? Last year's second-round pick, who's a great defender but not a shooter. What does that look like? So bottom line is, if you're adding a player, you have your top 7 set, and you're adding 8, 9, 10 spots in your rotation, at least 2 of those 3 guys have to be shooters. And this is an easy way to do it. The other thing is that the Wolves being over the cap, and this is part of the whole conversation today, and not only over the cap, but over the second apron. They're in a bit of a Denver Nuggets situation where some of these young guys that they draft are going to have to play. If they don't believe in Wendell Moore Jr., clearly to this point they haven't, they've got to find somebody they do believe in on a cost fixed contract with cost certainty over the next 4 years. They know they can plug and play this salary. It's got to be somebody that they think they will be able to rely on. And Leonard Miller is going to come up later as well. Josh Minot's another one. Those guys they're under contract. They're affordable. They have skill sets that could be valuable to this team's rotation next year. So that all matters in the context of who these draft picks are as well. The other thing the Wolves need is playmaking, both for players that can create their own shot, but also create shots for others. And this is my sub point that I made a second ago, or that I referenced a second ago. Backup point guards, the other thing you're going to hear a ton is, hey, the Wolves need somebody, and point guard of the future. That's the other phrase you're going to hear a lot. And already, if you look at these mock drafts, people that don't follow the Wolves on a daily basis are just kind of throwing that around. It's true, they need a plan after Mike Conley, but Mike Conley's making a lot of money this coming year and the year after. So this point guard of the future, they're not going to draft somebody really raw who might be the point guard in 3 years when Mike Conley retires, and they're not going to want his primary backup to be really raw either. I think they solved the quote-unquote backup point guard problem by doing what they did last offseason. Some combination of Jordan McLaughlin and or Monte Morris, plus either a Kyle Anderson or a similar player. What they tried to do last offseason was Jordan McLaughlin plus Shake Milton, and then have Kyle Anderson, Nickeil Alexander-Walker as options as well. I think they're going to try and cobble it together again this year, unless the right prospect falls. And we'll talk about some of the guys being mocked to Minnesota at 27 and guys that could fall to 37 that could fit that quote-unquote backup point guard role. But I think the bigger thing is creation from the backcourt, whether it's the wing position, the point guard spot specifically, somebody that can create some offense that can, as I like to say, be the straw that stirs the drink for the Minnesota reserve unit. More maybe in a more dynamic way, certainly than Monte Morris or Jordan McLaughlin, in a more consistent way than Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and give them, another option to give the offense some punch. So what I want to do is run down a few mock drafts. I'm not going to get into any individual player too deep today. I'm going to do that over the next few days. Today, I want to set up who are some of the names that we're seeing out there, and what is my quick take on them? Could they fit? And then I'll reference what I just talked about, the idea that the Wolves need a point guard or they need shooting or whatever. Why some of the point guards being mocked to Minnesota I don't think are realistic options. Some of the big guys or bigger wings, I should say, are guys that I think could be options for Minnesota at 27. And it's so hard, of course, versus back when the Wolves had a top 10 pick. No idea who's going to be on the board in the 20s. By the time we're in the 20s in the draft, the draft board's a mess. Guys fall, guys get picked way earlier. Teams are moving up and down and every which way. And this year's going to be weird because of teams are trying to get out of the draft, but nobody's really trying to get into this year's draft. So we'll talk about some of these names here next. get a couple minutes on some of these guys, and then we'll set up the rest of this week and next week, because I do want to do like basically half shows. I'll probably do like 2 prospects a show here moving forward to break down some of these guys more in depth, who I think could be legit options for Minnesota at 27 or 37 in this draft. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Do you watch Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day long? If so, no doubt you have to turn down the volume because of all the shouting. Instead, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right. So, took a quick spin around the mock drafts, and I'm going to kind of like, this is in no particular order. Some are better than others. That's just how this works. Clearly, some sites put just a little bit more thought into this and know more about each NBA team's needs, and others know more about the actual prospects. So again, this is admittedly surface level, because I want to throw out some names that perhaps you're not familiar with yet, or if you've been paying attention to the draft conversation overall, you may be loosely familiar with them. Again, no particular order. This just happened to be the order that I pulled them up when I was searching for various mock drafts. And actually, this first one is one of my favorite players being mocked to Minnesota, and that's Baylor Shireman from Creighton. And Shireman is a big guard. He's 6'6", 6'7", and good wingspan. He was mocked a couple of weeks ago in one of the ESPN mocks to Minnesota. I don't think ESPN isn't there anymore, but currently on the SB Nation one, where he's SB Nation has Baylor Shireman mocked to Minnesota. And what I like the most about Shireman is there's a lot of similarities between what he can bring to the table and what Kyle Anderson does. And again, like draft comps, NBA comps, I shouldn't say again. Let's level set this here. It's obviously a really tough thing to compare a college player to an NBA player, and no one's saying that from day one Baylor Shireman could be Kyle Anderson at the NBA level. What I'm saying is that the skill level or the I guess the skills that Shireman has are similar to what Kyle Anderson brings to the table. He is a big wing, a big forward who is a well-rounded, good passer. He can handle the ball. Again, he's 6'6.5". Like, he's a big dude with a 6'9" wingspan. He can handle the ball. He can pass. He can actually put the ball on the floor a little bit and has good touch. He's not super athletic, but he's got good touch. Really good feel, a good connector, like makes the right pass, both as the primary ball handler and then also, as just moving the ball on the perimeter. He could be a movement that now, like the big difference. Well, actually, let me continue some of the other similarities, I guess. Solid team defender. He's not going to be a great one-on-one defender, but because of his length, because of his basketball IQ, because of his overall feel for the game, he could be a solid team defender. And the Wolves are going to look for guys like that. They're not going to draft somebody who's going to be a point. I shouldn't say they're not going to. They're unlikely to be hunting somebody who's a point of attack defender at this point in the draft, because you have Jaden McDaniels, you have Anthony Edwards, you have Nickeil Alexander-Walker, you have Jalen Clark coming back from injury, and you've got other guys who are able to do that. Shireman could plug in and be a solid team defender, which is going to be really important. He can also offensively operate in the pick and roll. So all of those things, plus he's a good shooter. He's played a bunch of college basketball. He played 3 years at South Dakota State and 2 years at Creighton, and he's a 39% 3-point shooter. in college. So he's already a much better shooter than Kyle Anderson, and he could be a movement shooter that can, not like you're going to run a lot of plays for him, but he can be that guy if you need him to be. He can knock down corner threes. He's got pretty good range too. The form is good enough, and there's maybe not a ton of upside here for a guy who's already 23 with limited athleticism, but he's pretty plug and play as a bench guy. And what is one of the things that a conference finals team is going to be looking for? They're not looking for projects necessarily. They're looking for, as I said in the first segment, cost certainty and somebody who could provide some value. And Baylor Shireman, I think, could plug and play as an NBA kind of fringe rotation player right away and have a shot to earn a legit rotation spot. If he can bring to the table something similar to what Kyle Anderson brings to the table, plus shooting, and you gain that back from that spot. No, you're not going to get the same level of basketball IQ. You're not going to get the same level of playmaking. You're not going to get all of the other stuff that comes along with slow-mo. But if you can't afford slow-mo and you want to approximate it and get some shooting on top of it, 39% career from college three-point shooter, Baylor Shireman's the way to do it. So he's currently being mocked to Minnesota on SB Nation, and basically their summary of it is more about him hitting threes than anything else. But I think it's all the other stuff too. It's not just that. He did already, by the way, work out for the Wolves, and he's worked out for some other teams picking at the end of the first round. That includes the Jazz and the Celtics, who both pick after Minnesota. So there's a real shot he's on the board. Where he's mocked, I mean, there's some other, like the Ringer has him mocked as an early second round pick. They have him at 33. He's mocked at 28, which is the pick after the Wolves on CBS. So his range certainly seems to start about where the Wolves are and go into the early second round. I don't know that he's not going to be there at 37. I would look at him at 27 if I'm Minnesota. I actually really like the Baylor Shireman pick, and we'll spend more time on him on a future show here, but I like that potential selection. Another player mocked to Minnesota, the CBS mock draft, which has Shireman going 28, has the Wolves at 27, taking Johnny Furphy from Kansas. And that mock says the Timberwolves need shooting and floor spacing around Ant for the next decade, and Furphy will provide that. He's made huge strides over the last 18 months and has quality wing size to complement his shooting and linear progression. Johnny Furphy is, I actually don't hate that pick either. He's a big guard. He's 6'8". I think that he would provide that level of shooting that the Wolves are looking for. The Ringer has him going 24. He's only 19 years old. He's a little over 6'7", 6'7.5", 6'8" wingspan, and a good shooter. I think he in the open floor, sprinting to the corner to knock down threes, I think he'd be valuable there. He could do a little bit of rebounding for his size. He's not going to create it all. Like, he's not going to create with the ball in his hands. I think he's a solid enough defender, but this is, again, the type of player that you could get here where in Furphy's case, he's maybe a little less well-rounded, but he's maybe got a little more offensive upside than a guy like Shireman, and I think would be a better one-on-one, individual defender from day one. He is a pretty good finisher in the paint too, but again, I think he's more of a off the catch type shooter, off the ball shooter, than he is somebody who's going to create for himself with the ball in his hands. But I like the idea of Furphy here too. Somebody who he was only 35% from three last year, but I think he could be a better shooter longer term. But again, the skill set is shooting, size, that wing skill set. I don't like he's going to get drafted before Shireman. I kind of like the Shireman fit more for Minnesota than Furphy, although I do like Furphy. Either one of those would be fine picks for Minnesota at pick 27. Let's do this. In just a second here, I've got two more mocks to list, and then a couple other guys that have been thrown around in other mock drafts generally that are both point guards. And I'll explain why I don't love those selections for Minnesota. Actually, 3 of the next 4 I don't love for the Wolves at 27. So we'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more. You can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 that you could use to bet on everything from, I guess not the finals MVP over or anymore. That's kind of over. Plus, who's going to hit one out of the park at the next baseball game? And there's lots of baseball ongoing now. Of course, the Twins are actually right now, if the playoffs started, would be a wild card team. And despite their ups and downs, they're beating up on some bad teams, and they're going to be right in it in terms of the playoffs. But right now, you can also look at futures for the NBA championship winner next year. The Wolves have the fourth best odds, the fourth shortest odds. Right now, the Celtics are plus 300 as the favorite to win the championship next year. I'm sorry, the Wolves actually have the third best odds. The Nuggets are second at plus 750, and your Minnesota Timberwolves on FanDuel are a plus 850 to win next year's title. Dallas is fourth at plus 900. Milwaukee and OKC are tied for fifth at plus 1,000. So the Wolves have the third best odds to win the title next year. Go check that out at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so the Yahoo mock draft has the Timberwolves at number 27, taking none other than the Golden Gophers' own Cam Christie, coming into the draft out of just his freshman year. Of course, his brother Max plays for the LA Lakers, and I don't think he gets picked till the second round personally, but NBA teams like Bloodlines. They like the fact that his brother plays for Lakers, no doubt, and he's a good shooter. Problem is he's really thin. The upside is certainly there. I think there's a shot he goes in the late first round, but he's more likely a second round pick. He's there at 37, and the Wolves pick somebody like a Shireman or somebody who they think could be plug and play at 27. I could see the Wolves liking his combination of length, athleticism, and shooting ability. He's got to put on a lot of he's got to get stronger. He's got to put on weight, frankly. But the Wolves haven't shied away from that. I mean, look at guys they've drafted recently, albeit guys that aren't in the rotation right now, but Josh Minott, Leonard Miller. I think that there's a shot that could be interested in Christie at 37. I don't like him at 27, especially if, like in this Yahoo draft, Furphy goes 26 to the Wizards, so he wasn't even on the board. But I'd rather have Shireman or Furphy at 27 than I would Cam Christie, even if I do like Christie as a prospect. And I do. I think he's intriguing. The Ringer. This is interesting. The Ringer has the Timberwolves taking KJ Simpson, point guard out of Colorado. I don't like this. And I'll read what the Ringer has. They've got, quote, Mike Conley will turn 37 before next season and already has durability issues, which is a weird statement. Simpson would be the perfect guard to bring along as his backup and as a possible future starter who pushes Conley to a bench role that would demand less of him. All right. Team that went to the conference finals is not putting Mike Conley on the bench for a rookie from Colorado who they're just not. Like, that's silly. Is there a world in which they draft him? He's the backup point guard this year and then kind of takes over. I don't know. I don't think so. I really don't think so. Also, he's small. He's barely 6 feet tall. The wingspan's good. It's 6'4.5". But the Timberwolves aren't going to draft a 6-foot guard who isn't a great athlete. They're just not going to do that. And he shot the ball well this year. It's 43% on just under 5 attempts per game, but he was under 30% his first 2 years in college. He's always had good touch. He's a good free throw shooter. Like, there's a shot that's real, but it has to be real. If you're 6 feet tall without a great deal of athleticism, you got to be able to, that you can't shoot sub 30%. I'd be really surprised if the Wolves drafted a 6-foot point guard with the 27th pick in this draft. They're far more likely to pick a big wing or a big forward, somebody who can do multiple things and find their way in the rotation that way. Because if you want a 6-foot point guard, this guy's not KJ Simpson. No disrespect. He's not going to be better than Jordan McLaughlin in year one. He's just not. If you're taking him at the end of the first round in a shallow draft and he's small with limited athleticism, he's not better than Monte Morris. He's not better than Jordan McLaughlin. There's just very little upside there. It doesn't improve the Wolves' rotation. Whereas if you take the Kyle Anderson role or last year's Shake Milton role or whatever, and you backfill that with somebody who you know is going to be, with size, be a good team defender, be a good three-point shooter, and do some of these other things, there's just more, feels like a more realistic option. So I don't love the KJ Simpson idea. And related to that, another name that was thrown around on some other mocks as possibilities, and then there's also an ESPN kind of like a, not really a mock, but it's Jonathan Giovanni and Jeremy Wu that are talking about like what are multiple options for each of these teams at each of these spots. And one of the names that was mentioned was Tyler Kolek, the point guard from Marquette. And Kolek is also not a huge guard. He's like barely over 6'1", also not a great athlete. He's also 23 years old. Like he's very likely to be he will be a first round pick. He might even seek in the lottery. Yeah, he could shoot it. Like he's 39% this year on 4 attempts per game. And he's very likely going to be be able to operate the pick and roll at the NBA level. Good catch and shoot guy off the ball. But the lack of size and mostly the lack of size, but also just kind of okay athleticism. Like, I just don't see the Wolves doing that at 27. They don't love small guards. I know they have Jordan McLaughlin on the roster, but McLaughlin predates both Chris Finch and I almost say Gerson Rosas because Rosas is who signed him, but predates Chris Finch and Tim Conley. Obviously, Finch likes McLaughlin, but neither McLaughlin or Monte Morris was being trusted in the playoffs when they needed size. And of course, the backup point guard is going to play more in the regular season than he would in the playoffs. I get that. Bench shortens anyway. But again, this particular player, no offense to Tyler Kolek, is not going to be better than Jordan McLaughlin or Monte Morris next year. We're not talking about a team that was the 8 or 9 seed in the West. We're talking about a team that was the 3 seed, first for most of the year and went to the conference finals, a 56-win team. They're not going to just, if they can get Monte Morris for their mid-level exception, or they can bring back Jordan McLaughlin at a minimum contract, they're not going to spend a first-round pick on a small point guard with limited athleticism and potentially, maybe a shooting ability in the case of Simpson and very likely a good shooter in Kolek. But I just don't think there's enough there. There's far more to gain from picking a big wing that does more things. So I don't think either one of these guys are a great option for Minnesota at 27. Another name that was thrown out, and this was by over at ESPN by Jonathan Giovanni. He brings up Juan Nunez, who is playing in Germany, but he's from Spain, as an option. Most places have him as a second-round pick. Perhaps he's a pick at 37. He's big. I got to do some more digging into him, but I know he's big, and they talk about him as really good in the pick and roll. And there's no reason to draft him at 27 unless there's some sort of drafting stash isn't as much a thing anymore, but I guess that's a possibility. I think it's more likely the Wolves take him at 37 and do that, and do something else at 27, somebody who's actually ready to play. Because again, that's the trick. The Wolves aren't looking for a big upside swing, but they also can't just punt because they need cheap, they need affordable role players. They need affordable rotation guys. They need to stockpile a bunch of them and find one or two that works, whether it's Minot, Leonard Miller, eventually Jalen Clark, maybe Wendell Moore Jr., Jordan McLaughlin, and whoever they draft in this draft. That's 6 or 7 guys I just named, depending on who comes back in free agency, and they pretty much have 2 or 3 rotation spots to fill. So you can't just throw it away on a project, and you can't give it away. I mean, if they can trade out of the first round, maybe. But again, they need to fill the roster. And you can spend on a first-round pick to go over the cap if you need to go over your second apron to sign your own draft picks. And maybe if they can kick the can and sign a vet minimum. But I don't think they can. Like, nobody's trying to get into the first round of this year's draft. So all that to say, I think the Wolves are going to try and do something worthwhile, which like is always what teams are trying to do, right? But again, it has to be a player that they think is plug and play or has a shot to be plug and play. I don't think it's going to be a redundant player like a small point guard, an athletic point guard, or size for size sake, or a shooter that can't do anything else, because none of that fits. They have to find somebody who can do multiple things that can fill one of these roles. They're not going to drastically change the way they play next year. They can find an approximation of Kyle Anderson. They can find a better version of what Shake Milton was supposed to be. They can find a bigger Jordan McLaughlin or a bigger Monte Morrison, maybe. But the way they play is not going to change. And they're not going to hand a massive role to one of these guys who doesn't have the experience. This is a conference finals 56-win regular season team. Okay. Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, we'll do draft profiles. I'll probably do 6 players. and probably do a half show in each of them. We'll get you ready for the draft next Wednesday. Spend more time on guys who will be there at 27. And then we'll get into some guys that will almost certainly be there at 37 or could fall to 37. The Wolves could be interested in. It's such a similar range that like some of these names could be possibilities at both picks. I remember a few years ago when Keita Bates-Diop I liked as a first round pick, and they got him in the second round. And then he ended up being a fringe rotation NBA player anyway. But anyway, so we'll talk about a bunch of guys here over the next few days. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.